Welcome, my name is Audrey Ahmet. In this video, I'll be discussing possibilities and provocations for writing critical teaching philosophies. This process could also be thought of as ways to manifest a teaching manifesto. I use the background image of a quilt that I've been working on recently to represent that writing critical teaching philosophies is a reflective practice that takes some time, some thoughtfulness, and may continue to be extended. Throughout this discussion, I'll invite you to consider the purposes of writing teaching philosophies while provoking some thoughtfulness about your teaching practices. We'll think about how to manifest a critical teaching manifesto as an opportunity for you to take a leap in expressing your understandings and beliefs about teaching. It could be a method for communicating the pedagogies that you want to practice and that you think would support education for social and ecological justice. You're also encouraged to play with possibilities for creatively expressing your critical teaching philosophies while drawing upon course readings and other scholarly materials. You may have already written a teaching philosophy at some point, perhaps for one of or more of your previous course assignments. Likewise, the ECS 303 course syllabus is explicit about communicating your understandings of pedagogical philosophies and practices, especially related to education for treaty responsibilities, education for truth and reconciliation, education for decolonization, and education for indigenization. It's useful to continually revisit your teaching philosophies to contemplate how your thinking and practices may have changed and stayed the same. This is part of a professional practice, as noted by the Saskatchewan Teachers Federation Standards of Practice. As you revisit your teaching philosophies, renewal of your practices could be one of the intentions. Rather than something that is static and unchanging, it's better to view teaching philosophies as somewhat ambiguous, maybe even difficult or complex. Leave some openness for reinterpretation, for questioning yourself and your beliefs. The process might not feel very clear. It could be a bit cloudy or foggy, even baffling. It can be a laborious activity, but also very worthwhile. So to assist a little, I'll offer some provocations for writing a critical teaching manifesto. Perhaps the change of season from autumn to winter is one very appropriate time for pondering teaching philosophies. Slowing down is a strategy for thinking and writing. Thinking through writing is another way to complicate your assumptions about teaching and learning. Consider the pedagogical messages that are all around you. What does your relationship with the land teach you? I also suggest describing the lenses through which you experience the world. Attempt to notice the ways your social positions impact how you view education and pedagogical practices. In addition, consider how you might create learning environments that honor diversity while working towards social and ecological justice. Ask yourself what your responsibilities are. Writing belief statements may be a way to begin to determine what your teaching philosophies are. You might use prompts like, I believe education is for, I believe students are, I believe teachers should, I believe learning occurs when. Such statements can be very useful, especially when you critically analyze them. You might wonder how these narratives have been socially constructed and how you've come to believe them to be true. Ask about how they might be problematic, potentially reproducing common sense stories and systems that continue to privilege some and marginalize others. I want to caution you for a moment here. I want you to think about statements like, I love all children, or teaching is my passion. While statements like, I care about children are very nice, attempt to go beyond these kinds of usual statements about what good teachers might feel about students. Though I would hope all teachers care about the students they work with, this kind of statement doesn't say very much about your teaching philosophies. It may be better to consider how this belief about caring has something to do with the ways that relationships with students are fostered and maintained. I'd also like to offer one note about the word passion. The etymology of passion, its history, the way that the word has come into being, refers to suffering, and it has a Christian theological connotation. So it could be important to reflect on the kinds of words or terms that you're drawn to and why, and to think about what kinds of histories they indicate or imply. Maybe you don't intend to make those implications, and so you might decide to change the wording that you're using. Sarah Ahmed suggests that we might aim to cause a disturbance when we write a manifesto. The folding mouth monster image here was created by one of my nephews, and it seemed appropriate to me. It helps me to ask in what ways we'll use our teaching practice, our voices, to disrupt problematic normative narratives and systems of injustice. Your critical teaching manifesto could begin to cause a kind of disturbance, perhaps just first in yourself. It could be a practice in living on the edges of your comfort zone. Gravity Goldberg refers to teaching manifestos as declarations and reminders. A teaching philosophy is a collection of pedagogical affirmations and commitments that should call you as part of a learning community to action. This background image was taken at one of the climate strike demonstrations that happened in September of 2019 at the Saskatchewan Legislative Building in Regina, in the context of more global climate protests happening at the same time. To effect social and ecological justice, we need to leap. A teaching manifesto can be an opportunity for practicing a brave leap in your communication about why you want to teach. So I encourage you to take that leap. Though this LEAP manifesto isn't technically a teaching manifesto, you might read it to see how it calls for action in Canada with philosophies of relationality, responsibility, reciprocity, and respect. Gravity Goldberg challenges us to teach like ourselves. So I would add that this can mean that we practice using our voices and positions as teachers for social and ecological justice. In the following slides, I'll share my own manifesto of critical pedagogies, offering it as an example. I encourage you to develop your own ways of expressing your critical teaching philosophies. A few weeks ago, I collected these leaves, and I'll pair the leaves with kitchen scraps throughout the year until next autumn when the cycle starts again. Together, the dried leaves and the fresh peelings create fertilizer for rich garden soil to support the new growth of plants in summer. I use the image of these raked up fallen leaves as a representation of the following ideas, and that they're created from a kind of rich compost. I've spent time slowing down, reflecting on my prior teaching philosophies and teaching experiences, including my beliefs about what education is for and how I understand my responsibilities as a teacher. So this is how my current teaching manifesto has manifested. I'll show you 4 philosophical themes for action and continued growth. It is my leap, my kind of jump into the leaves. When I teach like myself, I collaborate and I contribute. I value collegiality and offer contributions to collaborative moments. I practice humility and vulnerability through a pedagogy of mistakes. I'm part of an embodiment of collaborative educational leadership. I share my own stories, perspectives, and understandings while actively listening to others. So this is the first part of my 4-part teaching manifesto. When I teach like myself, I challenge. I practice noticing and disrupting problematic normative narratives. I attempt to notice and unsettle systemic oppression, including settler colonialism, racism, heterosexism, classism, ableism, saneism, and more, reproduced by educational systems and beyond. I engage with pedagogies of discomfort, becoming comfortable with being uncomfortable. Through anti-oppressive and inquiry-based pedagogies, I invite and support students to challenge and to be challenged too. When I teach like myself, I acknowledge difference. I recognize that my social positions influence how I read and interpret the world. I listen to those with lived experiences that are different than my own. I commit to centering Black, Indigenous, people of color, LGBTQ2 Two-Spirit, plus neurodiverse, differently abled, and other marginalized voices, stories, and scholarship in course design. I seek to deepen good relationships with students, colleagues, and beyond. I attempt to come alongside rather than self-identifying as an ally of any sort. When I teach like myself, I recognize my responsibilities. As a white settler Canadian, I strive to understand treaty responsibilities and to become responsible. I acknowledge all our relations, including more than human kin. I practice acts of reciprocity, helping one another. I respond to the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's calls to action, especially number 63, which refers to building student capacity for intercultural understanding, empathy, and mutual respect, and identifying teacher training needs related to these topics. I embrace critical education for social and ecological justice. These points constitute my teaching manifesto at the moment. You might have a different way or multiple ways of representing your critical teaching manifesto, and this is good. I wouldn't expect your words or your representations to be the same as my own. Practice finding your own ways of expressing your critical teaching philosophies, ways that demonstrate how you interpret your pedagogical choices, practices, and responsibilities. So some supportive communication possibilities might be to consider using a complementary visual representation to support your written communication. You might play with metaphors that help you examine various complexities. And I would also encourage you to draw from course readings to support your thinking and your claims. Using citations and references throughout is a way to practice intellectual humility by noticing that your understandings are informed and not only anecdotal. So for example, here is one of my metaphors. Teaching is like cycling. Sometimes it's calm and other times windy. There are times when the wind is with me, times with side winds and headwinds, times when I feel supported, times when I have to persistently balance to stay upright. There are times when I tilt my head and focus on continuing to pedal. Nevertheless, I also have the abilities to adjust the gears, to take a break, to look forward, to kindly wave with those I meet along the way, and to slow down. I've used metaphors throughout this video. I've used the metaphor of the quilt, I've used the metaphor of the compost, and now I use the metaphor of cycling. These metaphors, and this cycling metaphor in particular, acknowledges and recognizes that my teaching practice includes struggle. I'm challenged to learn and challenged to teach by discomfort and through discomfort. This allows opportunities for me to practice resiliency and allows opportunities for students to practice being resilient. It also allows us possibilities to practice and nourish our abilities for self-critique, along with the possibilities for disrupting problematic normative narratives and systems, including school systems. So you might ask, when you're writing your critical teaching philosophies as a manifesto, what theories inform my teaching practice? This is one of the questions that you could seek to respond to as you manifest your teaching manifesto. For me, Donna Haraway reminds me to seek open passages for a praxis of care and response, for responsibility, in ongoing multi-species worlding on a wounded terra. This is one of the theories that informs my practice. You probably haven't read much of Donna Haraway, if any, and so I'm not asking you to refer to her work. It's just that's the work at this moment that speaks to me. So look back into the readings that you've done in your coursework. For example, here's one from the sections that I am working more closely with. I asked that those students read a piece by David Orr called "What is Education For?" And so I would also extend Orr's position that all education is environmental education. And he says by what is included or excluded, students are taught that they are part of or apart from the natural world. And so I would like to contend that all education is treaty education. By what is included or excluded, we learn how we are responsible together, or we're deceived to think that we're not. This is an example of how I might use citations and references to practice intellectual humility to inform and support my thinking and claims. So I'll close with a reminder. A critical teaching manifesto is meant to be continually reflected on, revised, and renewed. It's never really finished. It's only ever partial and always insufficient. Pieces could be added to and removed from the quilt. The pattern can shift and change. As teachers, our philosophies are always in the middle of things, in a process of becomings. In this way, critical teaching philosophies embody a pedagogy of mistakes and aim to disturb the curriculum of perfection. More questions, more humility, and more stories where we become capable together are what I'm after in my critical pedagogical philosophies and practices. So I hope this may assist you in your own processes of taking leaps, of manifesting a critical teaching manifesto as you teach like yourself.